wells, whether underground or below the surface, from reservoir or underground damages, including loss of water supplies, damage to or loss of the wellbore, which is something going wrong in that initial drilling phase or anywhere along the line of the wellbore, subsurface trespass, which is a legal term that we use, just as I can trespass by going onto your land physically. If a unwanted chemical or substance enters someone else's land, that can also be a trespass. And a subsurface trespass would be what we're talking about here is methane or a chemical blowing into someone's water supply, into someone's well supply. Subsurface pressure, which, as Professor Deaton said, can cause a faster migration. Water does do very, very strange things. It's very difficult to predict, but you can do it with hydrostatic or hydrogeological modeling. They're incredibly complex computer programs, but it's very interesting. You never think of groundwater as moving around, or at least I didn't until I had the experience of working with these scientists that figure out how plumes of contamination move. Radioactivity and pollution and contamination and its cleanup and control. So if it's not an issue, then why did a very smart and well-paid lawyer for Halliburton think it was necessary to release the company from precisely these type of things? That raises a question. Also, in closing, I want to share two studies with you. The first is a 2007 study by Penn State University and McKean County Cooperative Extension. And they looked at water quality in 200 private wells in an area of the Marcellus Shale. And this area has undergone extensive oil and gas well drilling for several decades. So they're looking back at primarily non-fractured, more traditional vertical wells. What they found is about 3% of the wells exceeded drinking water standards for total dissolved solids, for barium or for chloride, which are all associated with drilling. Another 5% of the wells had elevated levels of at least one of the pollutants that could be tied to oil or gas drilling. And they did a similar study of 200 wells in another area that didn't detect any water wells with the same pollutants prior to the intensive Marcellus drilling activities. We can't look at that and extrapolate it to our conditions here. The Marcellus and the Barnett are different, but it raises a question. If they're finding 3% of wells over an established drinking safe level, and then another 5% have been impacted in some way with a chemical that could be dangerous, that's something to think about. And the second was a 2002 study. This is a study done by the University of Texas at Austin, their geosciences department, and they examined what's called CCDD, or centralized and commercial drilling fluid disposal sites. So these are kind of the land farms or pits or injection well clusters. They looked at some in Texas, and they looked at 265 sites, including a small number of land farms. Texas sites studied included 134 sites, and they comprised 192 pits and about 13.5 million square feet of pit area, and that's just in Texas. They looked at chloride, total petroleum hydrocarbons, the VTEX family, barium, and arsenic. And here's some quotes from their report. And these are two professors at UT. They said, significant chemical concentrations define groundwater contaminant plumes that suggest leaks from pits into shallow aquifers. So they're seeing leaks on the surface, and these surface or shallow holding pits into the groundwater. They said the sites are potential sources of inorganic and organic contamination. Pit fluids may infiltrate into shallow aquifers through clay liners, and that's significant, or overflow berms, and impact soils away from permitted disposal zones. Sludge may also provide leachable sources of contaminants. That's important because one of the industry responses is that the clay doesn't leach. The clay is a impermeable barrier. And it may be in a perfect world or an academic setting, but in the real world, you're dealing with a lot of variables. And they found that these clay barriers weren't as impermeable as previously found. They said groundwater analysis at many sites have shown above background chloride and total petroleum hydrocarbon concentrations that indicate contamination from disposal pits has probably occurred. The probable sources of elevated chloride in groundwater are pit fluids that contain produced water accumulated from drilling. Approximately half of the sites had mean chloride concentrations in excess of the EPA secondary drinking water standard of 250 milligrams per liter. Some of the levels that they were finding were in the thousands, so 10, 20, 50 times the EPA secondary drinking water standard for chloride. The probable sources of TPH in the groundwater are the contaminated pit fluids. They said that another problem, they also become overfilled with water. This can lead to breaching of pit berms and allow overflow pit contents to the surrounding soil. The increased hydraulic head that attends an overfilled pit can also produce increased drive for pit fluids to migrate through the pit floor and walls into the groundwater system. And they also found high barium levels. They attributed that to barite, which is a heavy mineral used in the drilling fluids. And a land farm outside Texas was examined. They found chloride at the 1,250 to 2,000 milligram per liter level. Again, that's multiples of the 250 milligram per liter EPA secondary standard. And they found a change in concentration patterns over a 6-month period, so they found a plume that was growing out from this particular site. In Texas, they looked at a single site. It was not a Barnett Shale site. It was down in Matagorda County. But they found groundwater chloride exceeding 900 milligrams per liter and levels of over 10,000 milligrams per liter in a sludge. They found potential outflow from the site in an outwash area that they considered analogous to other sites where water from overfilled pits has basically overflowed and flowed out onto the landscape. They also found abandoned drilling fluid disposal sites pose potential threats to the environmental health of adjacent soils, underlying aquifers, and habitats that lie down hydraulic gradient of sites. Basically, they recommended that you do more near-site soil analysis and install additional monitoring wells, because right now there's monitoring wells on the perimeter of some of these. These academics recommended that those be increased. They also noted that a lot of these, and I've seen some well records in the Barnett, where there's been an injection well that may have been put in the 50s or 60s, and it's used, and it may have been nominally capped decades ago. But just as we've discussed that pipes in the ground can deteriorate or cement can deteriorate, these wells, the integrity of these wells can deteriorate, and they're filled with brine and they're filled with produced materials from both vertical welling and hydraulic welling. And so that's the second study that I wanted to discuss. Also, just to follow up on something that Esther said, the TCEQ TRC division, it's very, very complex and unclear. The general rule is TRC will deal with water, TCEQ will deal with air, but that's not by no means a ironclad rule. My understanding, and I haven't seen it, but there's a memorandum of understanding between the two governmental areas that defines when TCEQ will handle versus when TRC will handle. My recommendation would be, if you have a problem, contact both of them, and they'll probably work it out internally, but it's a good idea to contact both of them with that. The other thing, what can you do? And what, again, this is another Penn State study, and they had a great suggestion, and also Esther mentioned this in the very first thing, and that's get a baseline reading before drilling goes in. If I were negotiating on behalf of a group of landowners or a single landowner, I'd ask to put that in the drilling lease. Will it get in there? Probably not, but I would do my best to try to get a baseline results handled by a neutral laboratory that could set that baseline that both the driller and the landowner would accept. Penn State recommended getting one a year before the gas well is drilled and in one less than 6 months after the well is completed. They suggested that set of baseline tests be repeated every time the well is hydraulically fractured every 2 years, which comes first. And that's crucial, because if you do have an impact, one of the defenses would undoubtedly be, well, we don't know how long barium's been in that well, or we don't know how long you've had benzene in the well. And this would give you a baseline. This is before the development, and look, something happened right at the same time as the well was drilled, or right at the same time as it was fracked, or right at the same time that this land farm went in on the land. I will say, and I'll close on this, but with the land farming, and that's what the Fort Worth article was, different municipalities in the area are responding and requiring permitting without some action on behalf of the city. Land farms can often be put in a city without any notification to the city, because they're just not required to under any existing state or federal law. And essentially it can, a land farm can be established, can have produced water put in it, and can be plowed over or evaporated and covered up again, and the city or the surrounding landowners may never know if the cities don't have this type of ordinance. And we're seeing those passed in the area, but there's still a lot of cities where this can take place. It can literally come and be gone before anybody knows about it. And we've seen what type of chemicals are going in here, and that's a concern. So in closing, I'd just like to say I'm not anti-drilling, but I'm pro-responsible drilling. And I think everyone needs to have the information to help collectively make these choices. Individuals, government agencies, the industry. It would be great if everybody had the facts so we could figure out what's going on here and figure out how to deal with it and figure out a way that we can move forward. A lot of the benefits that the industry claims are true. You know, that it is an economic driver, does help reduce dependence on foreign oil sources, but it's also got to be done in a way that's transparent and lets everybody know what's going in around their water. And especially in this context in the Barnett, because we've seen large-scale development, but in West Texas or East Texas, the dynamics are different than development in a very densely inhabited metroplex like we're having here. And we're literally, you know, anybody who's probably in this room knows it can literally be in your backyard. You can have, you know, depending on your offset and your setback. And then also with the directional drilling, even if the well's up on the hill, that fracked portion could be directly under your land. And so I think it's important that everybody goes through with all the facts to make the best decisions for everyone. Thanks very much.